Today on Earth Focus, the glaciers of the Tibetan Plateau are melting. Life there is changing, but the impact will be felt around the world. We'll take a look. Earth Focus correspondent Miles Benson speaks with Deb Callahan, president of the Heinz Center for Science, Economics, and the Environment, on what the U.S. needs to do about climate change. Also, meeting the energy needs of the world's poor. What happens when people in the most remote parts of the world get solar power? All coming up on Earth Focus. It's called the roof of the world, the most elevated land on Earth. The Tibetan Plateau is the birthplace of Asia's many rivers. After the Antarctic and the Arctic, it's Earth's largest store of ice. But the Himalayan glaciers are receding, threatening to change life here forever. And the consequences will reach far beyond this isolated region. Culture and tradition are closely intertwined with the natural world on the Tibetan Plateau. Nature is venerated here and is the source of both sustenance and survival. A lot of snow and ice caps have melted, but many only see a topic for academic discussion. The problem actually very much affects people's livelihoods here. For example, nomads used to start milking yaks and making butter in May. Now, production is delayed until July, which means that nomads have 2 fewer months of income.
Glaciers aren't the only things melting in Tibet. Permafrost, the layer of frozen earth that holds water near the surface of the soil, provides moisture to the meadows and other vegetation above ground. The sinking and thinning of permafrost has drained the water supply and, along with warmer temperatures and intensifying evaporation, turned pastures into sand dunes or desertified slopes. Lakes and rivers have shrunk, endangering fish, gazelle, and other local species. Also damaged are houses and roads that sit atop of the permafrost.
Changes in the environment are forcing the local people here from the land. The glaciers of the Tibetan Plateau and the Himalayan mountains feed Asia's many rivers. Rivers like the Yangtze, Yellow, Mekong, Salween, and Brahmaputra. The Ganges, India's principal river, gets more than half of its water from glaciers. So what happens if the glaciers continue to disappear? Over 1/6 of humanity depends on them for water, people across 12 countries, including China, India, Nepal, Pakistan, Myanmar, Bhutan, and Afghanistan. And if these glaciers keep melting, over 1.3 billion people will face a life-threatening loss of water. There will be food shortages as water to irrigate crops like wheat and rice is diminished or disappears. The impact will be felt on the economy, on the political stability of the region, and on the health of the people.
These are the rivers that irrigate China's wheat land and China's rice land. And that means problems not just for China, but for all of us around the world.
The judgment of natural scientists is that the Yangtze source and nearby regions are very sensitive to climate change. Here, it comes sooner than in other areas, and it's more sensitive.
The thing that has just concerned me is places like Nanunami. So at this site, above 20,000 feet, at the source of these big rivers, there has been no net accumulation of snow since at least 1950. That means these glaciers are not just retreating at the margins. They are losing mass from the surface down at the highest point on the glacier. Whether we're talking about the Himalayas or the Andes or the ice fields of Africa, it's all the same story.
But in the Himalayas, glaciers are melting faster than anywhere else, retreating at a rate of about 33 to 49 feet a year.
Well, scientists from the Chinese Academy of Sciences have looked at China's glaciers and the glaciers on the Tibetan Plateau, and they say that 2/3 of these glaciers could be gone by mid-century, by 2050 or by 2060.
And you can think of a glacier as a water bank account that has been built up for over thousands of years. And in the 20th century, in the beginning of the 21st century, we are taking more out of that bank account than is being put in. And we know long term, pretty soon it's gone.
Glaciers are melting because temperatures are rising. The main reason, coal. Also contributing to the problem are high population densities, deforestation, and soot from burning wood, crop waste, or dung for cooking. But ultimately, it's all about coal. And things will get worse as China and India are dependent on coal for their economic growth. And both countries are going through unprecedented economic expansion.
China is relying heavily on coal because China is only rich in coal and lack of other resources. And coal provides a cheap and very cost-effective way to fuel the economy. And China also has rich coal reserves. That's why the coal dominance in China's energy mix cannot be changed in the near future.
This is a problem because burning coal produces carbon dioxide as well as other air pollution. But for climate change, the main pollutant that we care about is carbon dioxide. The scale of coal use that we're seeing in China is really just unprecedented anywhere else in the world. They put in about 100 gigawatts of new coal-fired power plants last year. That divided by 52 weeks, that's about 2 plants a week. China now has more coal-fired power capacity than the US and India combined.
Coal-fired power will triple in India over the next 10 years. Like China, coal-rich India is stepping up production to provide energy for its growing population, a population that will outstrip China's by 2030.
If you talk to the ministries of agricultural water in China and India, the top officials are very well aware of this glacial melt, but we have seen very little evidence that they're connecting the dots to realize the irony that the two countries that are planning to build the most coal-fired power plants going forward, their food supply is very dependent on this relatively stable climate. And now we know coal is the #1 culprit in global warming.
The government is also trying to diversify the country's energy mix to minimize the share of coal in its energy mix. That means the government has passed a law on renewable energy, its national law on renewable energy, which took effect from the beginning of 2006.
Under this law, renewable energy will account for 10% of total energy consumption in China by 2020. An ambitious undertaking, but one that may not be enough to counter the exponential growth of coal-fired power.
While China is responding to international pressure, while there are a lot of reasons why the world is looking at China, I think China tends to look inward, and what they're really concerned about is how climate change will affect China, will affect the people in China. If water scarcity and the impacts on agriculture are likely to be a really big concern, I think you may see the Chinese leadership responding to climate change in a way that we haven't seen yet.
India is also taking steps to green its energy mix with renewables to account for 12% of the country's power capacity by 2012. But for the people on the Tibetan Plateau, whose existence is already threatened by melting glaciers, these steps may be too little, too late. When it comes to climate change, many countries around the world are taking action. Deb Callahan, president of the John Hines Center for Science, Economics, and the Environment in Washington, D.C., and former president of the League of Conservation Voters, speaks with Earth Focus correspondent Miles Benson about where the U.S. is heading on climate change.
Deb Callahan, we've got a new administration in office, but it's one that's beset with economic problems. Is that going to take the environment off the table, or does it provide an opportunity to get things done?
Well, I think what's more important than me seeing this as an opportunity is the President of the United States sees the opportunity in crisis right now. And he has made it very clear, beginning in his campaign, during his inauguration, and since he has been articulating his policies. He believes that addressing our energy future in this country allows us to have an economic opportunity to help shift this economy to create the jobs of the future, to help shift our energy technologies into more sustainable technologies, and to wean this country off the importation of foreign oil.
There's a big milepost coming up this year, isn't there?
In December of 2009, the world is coming together to try and cobble together and ultimately approve the successor to the Kyoto Climate Treaty. So here in the US, before December, President Obama first had to put his team in place. The administration has to sort of formulate their very specific policies on climate change so they know what the parameters are they're willing to negotiate to at this international meeting. Then our Congress actually has to pass climate legislation, so we have a national policy on climate change and reducing carbon dioxide and those emissions which create climate change. All these things have to happen before our negotiators go to Copenhagen in early December to sit down with the rest of the world. The United States needs to know our position before we get there. There's a lot of things that need to happen.
Congress responds to public concerns. Do you think the American public is beginning to feel the urgency of climate change?
I think there has been a dramatic shift in the last 5 years or so in public opinion polling on climate change. That said, it's still not a top domestic priority among the American people. I do see polls that say, however, the majority of Americans believe it is something we must do something about. The majority of Americans believe that it is a result of man-made emissions. And so the point is very well taken that public opinion needs to continue to push the Congress. I think politically what's been very important is that the issue of energy has been tied to the issue of climate change.
These are not just theoretical scientific issues. These are real problems of life that we're facing that could even be threatening to our children.
Certainly within our children's lifetimes, if we don't stem these emissions which are creating horrible impacts down the road, our children's lifetimes will be terribly impacted. Their health, the economic health of nations globally, it's almost unimaginable.
We expect to see during the Obama administration actual visible advances in these areas?
We will, and again, as we shift from coal-fired power plants to solar and wind power, you're absolutely going to see, reduced emissions. There are bets being made on some technologies that aren't fully developed or really don't even exist yet. So, for instance, when you hear the president talk about clean coal technologies, that is in large part supposed to be clean because we're supposed to have what's called carbon sequestration. Sequestration is supposed to take that carbon dioxide that's a result of a power plant, grab it and compress it and put it in the ground and lock it up so it doesn't get in the atmosphere. That technology doesn't exist anywhere. We need to change our energy mix. Different parts of this country can produce energy in different ways. So in the upper Midwest, North Dakota, South Dakota, some of these agricultural states, they're ready to become the wind power capital of the world. But they've got to transmit that power from those rural areas to the cities where the power is really needed, which is why there's going to be something called a smart grid, which is able to take power that's created far away and send it where it's needed. And so that's another big part of the infrastructure that has to get put together. All of these things are measurables that are part of the menu of things that have to happen in order to address climate change. People have to change behavior. We need to change our technologies and our energy mix. We need to change the way that we invest in the future. So there's going to be a lot of measurables, but ultimately the way the environment responds to our activities is what's the bottom line.
It's not just the politicians, but the scientists and the engineers who are going to have to do some heavy lifting to deal with these problems.
And there's a great investment in this administration in technologies and in science. And I know the scientific community, not only in the environmental area, but in the health area and other areas, are thrilled because there's been a declining investment in investment in science, research, technology, and educating younger people in sciences. Hopefully we're going to see a lot more kids coming out of school saying they want to go into bench science or medicine or engineering. So these are exciting times because I think what we're looking at is hopefully kind of a phoenix rising out of these economic ashes and really kind of reinventing our nation in a way that's looking down the road to the future that's going to be brighter and better.
You're pumped.
I'm pumped. I'm ready to go to work, and I'm ready for all of us to join together and get this done.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
It's called energy poverty. 1 out of 3 people in the world don't have access to electricity. Most live in rural areas in developing countries, and for them, it's a blackout every night. As the world's population grows, so does demand for electricity, and the energy gap between the rich and the poor increases. The poor use wood, dung, or kerosene for fuel. Energy poverty means no power to pump water, refrigerate vaccine, or to connect to the global information network. For some in remote areas, hooking up to the grid is an impossible dream. But there are solutions that are making a difference. Solar energy is changing lives and livelihoods in the most unlikely of places. The Solomon Islands are an example. Let's take a look.
They live in Sukiki, a small village on the coast of Guadalcanal. It's part of the Solomon Islands, an island nation in the South Pacific. They have no electricity, but they do have the sun. Without electricity, the people of Sukiki are forced to use kerosene. And kerosene isn't always their friend.
The lantern was empty, and she was going to fill the empty lantern with the kerosene when the whole thing caught fire and exploded. So she got burns to quite a large percentage of her body.
This patient you have seen is typical for an exploding kerosene light. She's burned all over her front. Most patients, they stay in hospital an average of at least 20 days per patient. Because they have no alternative. There is no electricity in the village. It's just what is available, is kerosene lamps, nothing else. If they would have any other kind of lighting, all these burns could be prevented.
This is the story of how the people of Sukiki learned to make their own electricity by capturing the light from the sun. That's Bob Freeling. Bob is the executive director of a group called the Solar Electric Light Fund, or SELF. After all the equipment is delivered, the staff from SELF works with the villagers to map out a strategy. They trained some of the Sukiki villagers back in Honiara in a week-long orientation session, and now everyone is learning so that the village can continue to build and maintain the system after SELF is gone. So they set about making poles and digging holes and cutting down trees so there would be no shade where they put up the poles. And now it's time to turn on the lights. Sukiki has electricity, but its essence will not change because of it. Sukiki will hold on to its nature. The people love this land. They are part of it. And now the light from the sun is more a part of them.
Bob Freeling has directed SELF projects in more than 15 countries since 1997. He has received many awards for his work, including the 2008 King Hussein Leadership Award presented by Queen Noor of Jordan in March 2009. He speaks with Earth Focus correspondent Miles Benson about how solar power can bridge the energy gap.
Bob Freeling, the Solar Electric Light Fund, what exactly are you trying to do in the world?
Well, Miles, the Solar Electric Light Fund is a Washington, D.C. based nonprofit organization whose mission is to bring solar power to rural and remote villages in the developing world.
What is life like in a village where there is no lighting?
For approximately 2 billion people in the world, roughly a third or perhaps a fourth of humanity, whatever number you use, it's a very large percentage of humanity that even in the 21st century does not have access to electricity. And imagine for these people, when the sun goes down, these folks are retreating into homes that are lit dimly, if at all, by candles or kerosene lamps. Their productive day pretty much comes to an end when the sun goes down.
There are health problems that are exacerbated by the absence of electricity. People depend on kerosene, and burning kerosene emits fumes and smoke, and that causes problems, doesn't it?
It is said that people who live with kerosene lanterns end up smoking the equivalent of 2 packs of cigarettes a day. It's a couple of million people a year die from respiratory illnesses that are caused by indoor air pollution, open fires, kerosene lanterns. It's a huge health hazard. If you do nothing but replace those with solar electric lighting systems, you will have made a huge contribution to improving the health of rural families and communities in the developing world.
What changes do people experience when they're given light?
The moment when families are able to flip a switch and have an electric light come on for the first time in their lives. The first time that happened for me was in Western China. Traveling to these remote mountain villages that could only be reached on foot. And we installed these solar home systems, and I observed families experience electric light for the first time in their lives, and they were very moved, as I was. Also, I saw them be able to turn on a television set and access news from around the world for the first time. So their whole world was basically opening up before them. The power can be used to not just provide lighting, but also computers, where children can start to gain computer literacy skills at an early age. And when combined with wireless communication technology, when you bring both computers and the internet to a rural community, then you've really accomplished something meaningful.
You have a project in Bhutan. Let's take a look.
Light is the language of the universe. And in the heart of Bhutan, deep in the Himalayas, where the rare black-necked crane flies south from Tibet, the universe is in the midst of a breathtaking conversation. Each winter, the black-necked crane makes its home here in the valley. The people devote art and prayer to this winged messenger that flies on the light from its summer home in the mountains of Tibet. Bob and his organization SELF are here at the invitation of the Royal Society for the Protection of Nature to try to save the habitat of the black-necked crane while preserving the path towards modernization for the people of Popchica Valley.
There are a lot of conservation efforts going on which often overlook how the needs of people that live in and near these ecosystems are so critical to the preservation of these ecosystems, because a lot of people haven't made that connection.
Let's say, for example, Popchica is a very pristine environment, habitat for the endangered black-necked cranes, ecologically very significant. And at the same time, we have people with aspirations for development. There are ways by which both can be brought together. Conservation can be a basis for human welfare.
The 500 families who live in Popchica still cut down trees to make wood chips to light their homes. Even when supplemented with kerosene and its noxious fumes, the light is so meager that it is difficult for children to do homework, for weavers to weave, for tailors to sew, and for doctors to practice their art. Kerosene must be brought many miles over the mountains, often by hand and at great expense. To discourage the people of Popchica from leaving for the city, and to help preserve the habitat of the black-necked crane, the people of Bhutan asked SELF to bring in a clean, renewable source of energy for the valley. And so into this world steps the Solar Electric Light Fund.
Oh my, that's beautiful, isn't it? Ooh. This is a big room. The two lights would really work well in here. That'd be good. Have plenty of light.
It's been a pleasure just walking to each house and seeing how people are living, and then just seeing the instant transformation from the time you show up at the house to the time you leave. Their house and their lives have been transformed.
We also electrified the health clinic in Pobjika Valley, as well as the education center that is run by the Royal Society for the Protection of Nature.
2 billion is a lot of people to be living without light. Self can't raise enough money all by itself to solve this problem. Governments are going to have to get more involved, aren't they?
Well, most of our projects have been focused at the village level, at the household level, and we've typically worked with local NGOs, non-government organizations, to manage the project. So we will always have a local partner that we work with, and training and capacity building is a very important part of our approach to project design and implementation. But if our models can be adopted by governments and they see that these solutions are actually working and they can be scaled, then I think that we will have really accomplished something significant.
Do you see a day coming, perhaps not too far off, when solar power will provide most of our energy needs?
Within the next few years, it is predicted that solar will achieve what is referred to as grid parity, where it becomes as cheap to use solar for grid electricity than conventional fossil fuels. It's an opportunity for us now to take the lead in bringing advanced energy technologies to the developing world, because at the end of the day, creating a world that works for everybody, bringing social justice to the parts of the world that have been so lacking in resources and opportunity, that will go a long way, in my opinion, to making the world safe and secure for everybody.
Bob Freeling, thank you very much.
My pleasure, Miles.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs. Programs that connect you to the world.